Today I'm going to share the story of how we built wealth from zero. So 29 years ago, I moved from Asia to the US. I had graduated in 1993 with a computer science degree, and I was offered a job here in the US as a software programmer. In my first job after college, I was paid about $50 a month. Now, $50 a month doesn't sound like a lot, and it really isn't. Contrary to a lot of people think, the standard of living in Asia really depends on where you go. If you go outside the city, you can probably stretch dollars there. But if you live in the big city, with what I was making, there was no way I could afford a car, an apartment of my own, or really anything. In Asia, a lot of the families lived in multi-generational homes, and a lot of the family members usually pool their finances so that they can pay the bills. My family was no different. My family, for most of my life, we rented an apartment in the city because that was what we could afford. There was like no prospect for us to buy a home. At the time that I left to go to the States, I was making $200 a month as a programmer. And then I came to the US pretty much with two pieces of luggage, which had my clothes, my computer books, cassette tapes, and a small Sony Walkman, I think, because I loved listening to music. That was really everything that I had in two suitcases. When I came here to the US, the company that hired me did give me an advance, which was like $3,000. And what I didn't realize, at the time I was 25 years old, I thought that was a lot of money, but it didn't really go that far because apparently you had to pay your deposit and first month's rent. So immediately, right, that went out. And then when you have an apartment, you have to buy certain things. There were a lot of things actually that I didn't buy. For example, I bought like a folding table and like two chairs and just the minimum amount of pots and pans. Like one, I think I bought like one saucepan and one frying pan, place setting for one person, and or maybe two people, and then just uh, it wasn't even like a bed. I don't think. I think it was just like a bedroll or something like that, and a lamp and a garbage can. That was all of it. Because I arrived in the winter months, I had to buy a coat, and I was told, you need to buy like this down coat because it gets really cold here where I am, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is like $150 for a coat and a pair of boots. But I was told it was good; it would last me all winter, and it did. But by the end of all that, I had 1,300 left, and it really was the first time that I felt that I was so blessed to be here, but at the same time, it was scary. Right, I had no safety net. I have no family here. A lot of the people that I met were through the job, and you quickly become friends with them. And thankfully, there were a lot of people in the community, the Asian community, that were also Christian, and so those first few years, really, I was so blessed to have found a church, a local church that we could go to. And even though I didn't have family, at least I felt that I wasn't alone. So that was really a blessing. Um, but I came here to the U.S. because I wanted to help my family overseas financially, and so um, I started sending money home. Right, but even through all that, uh, I didn't really make that much. I found out later on that I was only paid half of what my American counterparts were being paid because I was on a work visa and I really didn't have that much of a choice. And also, I think in Asian culture, we really don't question things. We just take things for what they are, right? But it didn't matter. I found a lot of contentment in being frugal. I didn't I didn't have a car for a long time actually. When I first arrived, even in the winter months, I would walk everywhere. It would take me 2 hours to get to work by bus in the snow, and sometimes the bus wouldn't come, and I had to walk in the snow, which was horrible. But you know, thankfully God got me through that. And yeah, I would buy groceries. I would just cook healthy, use coupons wherever I could, and really just try to not spend money. Right, I would go to the library to borrow books or CDs or movies or whatever it is. Never really bought anything for myself. Uh, and then so that I could send money home. The biggest thing I think I spent money on was like those phone cards, because we didn't have cell phones yet. I think cell phones were available, but I didn't own one because they were expensive. At least in my mind, they were. And I had a landline, and I could buy like one of those phone cards. We didn't have Viber or WhatsApp or any of those applications that we have today that we take for granted, that we can just call people overseas or anywhere in the world, really, right? So that was my biggest expense. But uh, the first year I was here, so I was 25, I wasn't allowed to contribute to a 401k, but the following year I was. So as soon as I qualified 1 year later, I started saving 10% of my pay. Now, if you think about where I was at the time, it was kind of a big leap of faith, because 10% was a lot of money for me back then. And, I was trying to figure out in my head, okay, I have to send this much home, I have to pay this much in rent, and then 10%, that was a lot. And, I also believe in tithing. So even way back then, because I had been a Christian already before I came here to the US. And so it was a lot. It was a big leap of faith. And for many years after contributing to my 401k, it was really hard to see any progress. I was like, what's happening? I'm not really sure that anything's happening. But, I just held on to the belief that from what I read and from what people told me, that, uh, you know, you just have to give it time and let your investment grow. And so that's kind of like how I started. Now, my husband, right before he joined the military, he was working in a potato farm picking potatoes and stuff. So, really, like for him too, right? He started with nothing. Um, and it is kind of interesting that both he and I, even though we have different backgrounds, like he is originally from here, right? And I'm from overseas, and yet somehow we met. And when we met, both he and I had professional jobs at this point, right? Um, and he had two boys from previous relationships. And so, it came to a point where we were going to be married and then would become a blended family. And there's a lot of complications related to that too, right? Like, found out pretty quickly, I guess there's things like, child custody payments that you have to do. And we really did have an interest in getting custody of the boys, because we felt that we could provide them a good home environment. And so the other side of that, though, is there's a lot of lawyer fees. And it's very hard if you're the dad, apparently, to fight for custody. We ended up with quite a big lawyer bill. And at the time, I also had a Roth 401k that I'd opened at the suggestion of a friend. And my husband had his 401k. And we ended up emptying those two accounts to pay for the lawyer. And that was a mistake. Later on, we found out the following year, we ended up paying a penalty for not being 59 and a half, which was bad, and also had to pay taxes on his 401k. We ended up owing a lot of taxes on it. And so, yeah, that was a huge mistake. And from that point, I think we realized that, okay, let's not do that again. And my husband restarted his 401k, but he had to restart from scratch. Um, Thankfully, I had kept my 401k, although also there were times, when the market was down. I think we were dating at the time in 2008, the market, there was like the housing bubble, and the market was very bad. And um, I lowered my contributions from 10% to 6%. And I kicked myself for doing that. My husband actually had to talk me into going back to 10%, even though the market was bad, and just again, trust the system, right? Timing the market is better than timing the market. So, even though my balances, I think, had dropped, I don't know, 20, 30%, I took a leap of faith, and that leap of faith allowed me to just trust the system and keep contributing to 10%. So then fast forward to now, my two boys are out of the house. They're both in the Navy, actually, doing really well for themselves, right? So we don't have to pay child custody anymore, and there's all the expenses too, right? Of having extra kids in the house as well. And don't get me wrong, I love my kids, and I would never trade that for the world. But there is a financial side, right? Like, I think I read somewhere that raising kids cost 150, 250,000 or something like that, which is, I could see that. I really do believe that might be the case. Um, but also in the last, I want to say, 5 to 7 years, um, I ended up in higher paying jobs, especially after I became a US citizen. I think at that point, I kind of learned how to be more assertive and also speak for myself and understand what my value was and be able to negotiate better salary, right? It's still not perfect. I think there's still the old Asian persona in me that is hard to get rid of. And, there's a lot of Asian culture that you just accept things for what they are. But it's been a blessing in the last few years. We were able to end up with higher paying jobs. And so slowly, in the last 5 years, I want to say, we've been slowly trying to increase a little bit every year. Every time we got a raise, we tried to increase a little percentage of our contributions to our 401k. Now, I think at our age we should be maxing that out, right? But um, we're not quite there because we still have other bills to pay. Thankfully, we don't have consumer debt. We do have credit cards, which is not really something Dave Ramsey advocates, and we do believe in a lot of the things that he says. Like having an emergency fund, tithing. Uh, but the one thing that is still difficult for us is getting away from credit cards. The nice thing, though, is I will say we don't carry any balances, and we pay that off every month, which is really important, right? Part of being able to be financially free is also not having any debt. So here we are, 29 years later for me, right? Starting from zero to where my husband and I are contemplating whether we can walk away 5 to 7 years from now from our jobs forever. It really is such a big journey, I think, for him and I, right? It's decades, really, like many years. You really don't see what's going on. It's only in the benefit of hindsight, I think, that you realize, oh, okay, I'm glad I did this. Okay, shouldn't I have done that? And maybe in a future video, I will share some of those regrets and things that, knowing what I know now, maybe we shouldn't have done, right? Like emptying our retirement accounts and paying the penalty for that, or um, leaving the market when things are down, right? And that sort of thing. The lesson I want to impart today is that our journey was definitely not smooth. And it's really those consistent small habits that got us to where we are. And it wasn't easy, it was hard, right? There were a lot of times, there was a lot of doubts, and we made mistakes. But the thing that I think I'm hoping that the people watching this can take away is that there's hope. The key is just stay the course and just continue doing what you're doing, no matter how small it may seem. I'm hopeful that our story encourages someone out there who is watching this video and thinking, there's no way that I can retire, right? Because we never thought we'd get here, honestly. Um, there were many times I'd review my balance and I'm like, this thing is not moving, or it seemed like it wasn't moving for many, many years. But, over time, it does happen. So going back to the title of this video, right? How we built wealth from zero, I also want to clarify what wealth means. So for us, being wealthy isn't being rich. There's a difference between those things. And for us, what wealthy means is being able to pay all our bills, right? Being able to provide for our kids when my kids need something from school or whatever, right? We're able to supply that. If we have medical procedures or I need new glasses or whatever, there's no second thought. We'll just pay for it because we've saved enough for that, right? That's the kind of security that having enough can bring. And that to me is what wealth means. It's not having all these zeros in your bank balance. It's really just the ability to be comfortable, but also setting the correct expectations, right? For us, the biggest thing I think that I will say that has allowed us to be where we are is also being pragmatic with how we spend our money. We don't buy anything frivolous. We don't, buy luxury goods. Where we could save, we save. Early in my life as a single person, I clipped coupons for many years. Even like, I think even when my husband and I got married, I was still clip coupons and stuff. So I never buy anything that's not on sale. And I do try to plan our menu, for example, at home, um, with what's on sale at the grocery. And those are the kind of habits that I just developed all these years and have stuck with. So my advice to you is don't be discouraged. I hope our story resonates with people and just push through. Next week, I'm going to talk about stock allocations and how we decided what to invest in. Now that's not financial advice, and I'm not a financial advisor. So if you need more information on that, please do your research and consult a professional. This series is largely for educational purposes, and I'm hoping that we can distill some of this information in a much simpler way so that somebody out there can benefit from it. And this is my way of paying it forward, right? I have learned a lot from a lot of different people, a lot of resources, but I've always found that investing and saving for retirement was a very complex topic. So I started this channel to share our journey, maybe as an accountability thing, but also to pay it forward and maybe help other people by sharing our stories. So we'll see you next time. Hope you have a great weekend. Thank you.